Welcome back to my little YouTube channel. Now, if you've been watching my other videos, you'll see I've been working on this lovely Ferrari 355, lovely car. Done some welding underneath, there's some corrosion in the jacking point and a couple of other places underneath, which is pretty good, but we've had to, make some panels because they're not available. Anyway, basically I've worked my way right along the car and we got to the front. So the next bit under the front was to clean around the wheel arches and get it painted under steel, get it all ready, and just slip the anti-roll bar off and clean the U-bolts up and the brackets, and that would have taken probably an hour, if that. But as in all things restoration, nothing is simple, and a little job now has become a big job, because this is the anti-roll bar, and the anti-roll bar sits transverse along the front suspension. These arms sit on the end. They go down to the bottom wishbones, and it's what the Americans call a sway bar, we call it an anti-roll bar, and basically it helps with suspension and the handle of the car. So anyway, you can see there's some rust and corrosion on that bar. Well, if you're going to do the job, do it properly. We couldn't leave it on there, it'd have to come off and be clean, because the rest of the car is going to be absolutely beautiful, so we thought we'd do that as well. And also, on these U-brackets, they're quite heavily corroded. And they need to be a nice sort of zinc colour, let's say goldy zinc colour, but we've got to sort that out. So, should have been an hour's work, but unfortunately it turned into a big job, and I'll explain why. This is the anti-roll bar bush, which sits on the anti-roll bar there, and it's bolted up in the inner wing. So basically, this piece sits in there, and the anti-roll bar goes through, and the arms come here down onto the suspension. Now, Ferrari, in their wisdom, when these bolts are fitted from the factory, they actually come through the chassis. So they come up through the chassis, and then this bolts onto there, then you put a nut on top, all done lovely, which it was from the factory, very good. But what Ferrari decided to do was they didn't weld those bolts on. They actually put them on this sort of thing. I know this is a nut and not a bolt, but basically it's a little cage nut. And this would have been the same. This bolt would have had a cage on it like that. And then there's a square hole up in there. That pushes in, clicks in, and then when it goes in the production line, they bolt everything on goes the U-clamp, rubber's done, tightened up to a certain torque, job's good, and away it goes. Now, 30 years down the road, and a bit of corrosion gets involved, and these little cages rot out. So when you go to undo these bolts to get the anti-roll bar off, they probably turn a couple of turns, and then they lock, and then it twists round, and then these spin inside the chassis, and all you're doing is turning a nut, and you ain't getting anywhere very quickly. So you think, get underneath it, put a spanner on it, but unfortunately it's in a box section, so those captive cages are in a box section under there, and you can't get to the back of them. The only way you can get to the back, you've got to cut the chassis out there, which we've done. There we go, so cut that out. It's quite tidy there, nice and clean. The anti-corrosion did do its job on this part of the car, to a degree. So these bolts would have been up in there with the cage, and if you can look up in there, you can see the square holes where these bolts would have been up in their cage. And you can see there's lots of play, because there's supposed to be a cage around that bolt, which has now fell off and disintegrated. So my next plan, clean these up, and then I'll weld them back into there and then re-weld that on. But if you come with me and look at the other side, hey presto, we've done it. I've actually done this side, so I've cut that panel out, taken the bolts out, put them back on the U-clamp. Because there's a bit of play in the bolts, I've bolted it back on so I know it's going to fit, and then I've welded those bolts back in, put some nice new nuts on, and I know it's in the right place. So that's my next job on the other side, to do the same of that, and then we can check the anti-roll bar fits, and then we can clean these brackets up, and then we could get on with the original job. It was only going to be an hour away, but it's now a whole day away. So anyway, we'll carry on. I better get cracking. Well, I've cleaned up the bolts that go up into the U-bracket, put some new nuts on, pushed them up into there so they're ready for welding. When I've cleaned this out, that's the cage nut that I was using as a demonstration, but inside this chassis member there's the original caged nut off the bottom of the nut that was in the bolt that was in the bottom. So has just sat and rotted away. But anyway, the next thing to do now, this is lined up. I've got my U-bottom, my rubber in to make sure it's in the right position. I'm just going to weld this up now, and then I'll have to re-weld this plate back on. I'll just double check that and then we'll get on with it. Glad that's over. So I've managed to get our studs welded back into the chassis, and then I put the original plate back on, welded it, ground it flat, and it looks really nice. It's smooth, so I can now get on with the job I originally meant to do, was get the anti-roll bar off, which was going to be a 2-minute job. It turned into a big job, but that's done. The other side's done. Now I can get all this painted, get it back, the old under seal off and whatever coating done. It's not very nice. And get it back original. I might end up taking the wings off because there's all sort of gunk up there. So I'll take the wings off, get that painted, and then I can move on to the bodywork, which is the next big job because this car's got to have a full respray. But now this is done, I can get my anti-roll bar bushes off, get those cleaned up, get some new bushes in there, get the anti-roll bar back on, and dare I say it, this job is now better than new because it's welded on. You can take those bolts on and off without the fear of those captive nuts shearing off inside the chassis. So until next time, go steady.